Hi, everyone.
Sorry.
Okay, got it. Okay, yes, as Andrew said, so this was my action research thesis, which I finished last year. And it was an action research, which I did it, well, I'm going to explain all of this. So I did my index thinking about, since it's an action research, with all the phases, the stages of the action research. So I started with the problem, which was the introduction in my thesis, the plan of action, and then the background of this, of the research, and the take action, where I took the action, which is my methodology. And then I'm going to end up with your observation, the results, and a short reflection. So the problem. My students, when I started doing this intervention, it was with students, adult students that are all professional from different areas, engineering, science, and the language level is, or was, pre-intermediate, intermediate B1. And then the second time I applied this intervention was with my undergrad students, which pretty much are future engineer and from the science area. So the first group was 4 students, and the second one, my undergrad students were 25. So my research problem, the problem is that my students are limited to practice speaking because they have to use the course book. And these course books are based on grammar of the written language and not of the spoken language. Also, my students told me that they want to feel more comfortable when speaking outside the classroom and talking about cultural, professional issues and political topics. What do I understand by natural conversation in this research is talking is an essential part of communication, which is situated in real time and co-constructed with others while discussion is unfolded. This is what Burns says. Also in the same line, we have Egging and Slate, and they say, as we take turns in interaction, we negotiate meanings about what thing is going on in the world, how we feel about it, and how we feel about the people we interact with. So that's why I decided to use my research object to enhance natural speech among the students by incorporating reading, analyzing short stories in order to students can tell their personal story. Why? Because as Eggis and Slate say, stories are merged from social experience and are shared in the social context. The way interactants tell the story express dimensions of their social identity. So let's go where I took the action. It's my theoretical background. So as we know, conversation is spontaneous and it's a face-to-face where meetings are shared and students need to practice this. However, natural conversation is an interaction that involves a set of arbitrary linguistic forms that are applied to a cultural context of the real world. But the course books, there is no invitation to this practice. There is no critical understanding of the social interaction, what is happening, how meanings are created, how identity is developed and negotiated, and how the relation between culture and language are transformed discursively. This is important so students can reflect on this relationship of culture and language and its context, so students can observe the use of language in relation to cultures of the users in different dimensions of themselves. This leads to an inner reflection, which is based on the critical cultures of the 5 saviors of Birans. Why? Because it views students critically on culture, community, and society as well of the other countries. It gives a reflection about their own identity to clarify what is happening in the world. And then we have natural speech conversation. There are many types of conversation, but the one I'm based on is telling stories. Telling stories occur naturally every time and everywhere in a conversation. It is only an extended turn in the interaction between the people. And it's a space for sharing social experience which are understood in the social context. So one of the characteristics of natural conversation, I mean, telling story, is the add-on strategy from Bieber. This is a reduction used by the speakers. So utterances are composed by clauses. This is a relation between the embedding and the coordinated clauses. There is no overlap, but a linear sequence of finite clauses like units. As we can see in that example, this is a chunk expressing of a single idea, and we can say it has a considerable long length and it's complex, but it doesn't raise many problems for the hearing or the speaker in a conversation, because it slows down the pressure of the working memory. And then finally, I want to show how I applied this specifically. There are in one line, for example, we have the written and the spoken language. They're both very opposed to each other. But in the middle, we have this blurred text, which is kind of speech-like, like when we send WhatsApp, it's immediate feedback, but it's written. And also now the voice, this is actually very interesting for our future research to actually how we can apply that to our classroom. But let's go back to my presentation. So the plan of action. We have this, here we can see my lesson plan. I divided this in 4 stages, which was also my methodology. So the first stage, it's where I provided the learners with, we recycled a warm-up, I mean, an activity we just saw a couple of weeks before, where we saw the connectors, but, because, and so. This is also part of the add-on strategy to build this very complex clauses. And this is normally used in the spoken language and not in the written. And if you can see in all the course books, most of them are used in the written language, which is, we can say, not correct. And so we saw this, how to use it in a transcript I brought to the students, and they could see it, how they were, but, because, and so were used. And then the students had to read the short story quietly and underlying all the words and phrases they did not understand. In the second stage, students reread the story, but out loud. And there we went through all the vocabulary that students didn't know and the phrases, but specifically, we tried to understand the culture behind the stories. So we analyzed it critically. The objective was to get the students acquainted with the meanings of the social practice and social identity as suggested in the text, how the lexical meanings of the text were used. Also, we try to not only reflect on the story critically, but also reflect about our own culture, how they resemble, how we can find some connectors there. This leads to our third stage, where students wrote the reflection. So as I said, the call of continuum, where we have this blurred text, this is where I told the students that they had to write this reflective note, but instead of writing this long full sentences or even paragraph, they just should write notes, like WhatsApp notes, or just when you take some notes, like these bullet points, and with what happened with the social problem in the short story, and also how they can connect them to them, how they resemble. So I gave them, in the first time, I gave them, well, and also in the other times, but in the first story, first story, my name, like from San Cisnero, I gave them some questions so they could get the idea what to reflect on. For example, do you like your name? What is the story behind your name? Which social problem do you think connects with your life, past or present? And yeah. So at the fourth stage, that's where this written reflection, actually student could use it to speak about their personal story, because as we connect the social problem in the short story, and they had to reflect and write down some notes, how this the social problems reminds them to some story of their own life. And the fourth stage, they have to talk about it. And this notes gave them like the organization, or maybe the like the kind of empowerment to talk when they are super shy. And so the purpose of this stage is to encourage students to talk about themselves without paying attention to the correct use of linguistic form. This is actually very important. This is the part where we don't think about the linguistic form, but more about what they are talking. And yes, so yeah, so let's show you the last part. So the criteria for this, the selection of this literary text, I use, since it's action research, I used 2 cycles, and each one had 2 stories. The first one was My Name by Sandra Cisnero, followed by Americans by Sandra Cisnero, and then The Smiling People by Osama Alomar, and The Tiny Seed, The Story of Wangari Maathai by Nicole Rich-Dick. These were the 4 stories I used in both times. I mean, the first time I did the intervention, and the second time with my other students, with my undergrad students. So what I learned from this experience, it was a very interesting, and I liked it a lot, actually, because I not only was able to prove that address strategy helps students to speak better, they actually use it in the conversation. But what happened, like, since the first intervention was done right in after October 18th, when we had the social outbreak in Chile, and our classroom was right in La Moneda, so we had to leave the room like once or twice for the 4 times we met for this intervention. And yeah, I mean, the students were super stressed, nervous. Even me was like, we are all the time thinking what is going to happen next, right? So we couldn't actually, the first day was good. I mean, the first day, but the second, the third, we had we couldn't actually finish the entire activity as planned. We had to leave the room because of the building's safety measures. But the last time, when we met the last time, a couple of weeks later, and we did this intervention, we read the story The Tiny Seed. But the interesting happened was like major turnaround, because the students were not being shy talking, but they were very like still following the exact guidelines of the activity. But then in the last time, after we read The Tiny Seed, I don't know what's happened, or how the students were able to connect that story with the smiling people. So one of the students started talking about the smiling people, and how people in her office, they use this mask, the smiling mask, all the time. That story made another student remember a story of the dictatorship in Chile, which was an anecdote, like kind of funny. And that story made another student remember something that happened, another anecdote that happened a couple of days ago. So if you can see, like normal conversation, we tell story and we always remember other story, and we start linking each story with another story. So the short story were only a hook, so students could speak. So I said, students converse by sharing 1 or 2 personal stories related to the present and past. So what students said both times, I mean, the first time students said it was easy for them to talk. They didn't have to think or invent something to say. Like in the course book, you have all these strict activities and what to say. Here, students were being very free, and yeah. And the second time, well, I did this on Zoom last January. And it was a space for students to able to share personal story. And I got very impressed, because I went to the breakout rooms, and the students, I heard them speaking like real conversation. which didn't happen. Well, Zoom is actually, everything is so complicated now with the pandemic and all the stress. But this was an instance that I gave them to students a hook to speak, and then they couldn't stop speaking and sharing their personal story. It was a moment for them to be free and just share.
That's 5 minutes. Just
yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So to end this presentation, I have to quote myself because my ego has been way too up. No, I'm joking. But yes, short stories are a good platform for students to become more aware of both their and their own target culture within the global perspective. Thus, learners should be exposed to diverse aspects of a foreign culture, including reading about alternative voices and considering less represented issues. So as Margaret Atwood said, in the end, we all become stories. Thank you. That's it.
All right.
I'm ready. Yeah.
Well, we need to invite everybody to type their questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy, thank you, Veronica. Felipe and Patricia, can you please take up the questions?
I think so far we don't have any, but
so far we don't have any questions.
Oh,
in the chat at least.
I muted myself. You said you may still, you have some additional things to say at the end. Do you have anything that you wanted to add or that you didn't get a chance to say when we interrupted?
No, actually no. Well, I think I encourage teachers to do this, to try short stories. So I just use this for short story, and these are very interesting because I'm going to explain just a little bit about what the stories are. So Sandra Cisnero is a Chicana. She lives in the States, and she writes in English and also in Spanish. I read her story in Spanish. It was very difficult for me. I'm not native Spanish also. I'm not native English either. So I think that was something that I had a hard time to understand Spanish, because she writes in with her own culture. So that was very interesting, because when we read it in English, all of these stories weren't translated. They were written in English, but from the perspective of the people from their own culture, like us, when we are not native speakers of the language like English, and we read our stories in English. And so in my name, there is this social problem of patriarchy, and I mean, Mexican immigration and the social classes and migrants and the generation. So it was very profound to get to know what we know, or maybe we have an idea about migration in the States, but here we were able to see from a different perspective, from her perspective. And so Americans, it's when it's not written by name, it's written from being in the States, but Americans are this children of immigrants that go back to Mexico, and all these cultural differences, cultural shock, cultural differences. So to explore this with the students gives you a different perspective of what it means to speak English or being immigrants in English. And also our own life. For me, it was like when we read this, they remember lots of stories about their family, like their names, what they are called like that, or and the like daily life in the family, which they're very close to us. And you get surprised, like you say, okay, they're from the States, she's a child of immigrant, and then you have so many things that are very Latinos. And then we have Osama Lomar, who is from Iran, I think, or Syria. I don't know. It's from Middle East. So sorry. I forgot the exact country where he's from. He's now living in the UK. He was awarded for being a a writer of very, very short story. So all his stories are below 100 words. And The Smiling People is about a guy who doesn't want to smile to the picture of the government or the king of his country. And he goes into jail. But the social thing, like people react because of that, even they might be against it. It was very, I mean, he writes these very powerful pictures, stories about Middle East. And then you think it's like similar, coincidentally, I didn't thought about this before having the social outbreak in Chile, but coincidentally, it was so close to our reality, what we are living now. And The Tiny Seed was an amazing story. You should read her, Wangari Maathai. She's an amazing woman from Africa, and she went to the States to study and then went back and built empowered women. And she created the group of women with the green belt. And her story is just like amazing, not just because of her life, but also because you see all the environmental problems that we are facing now. And it happens here in Chile too. I mean, the same problem that she's struggling in Africa, we are struggling here now in Chile. And it was, I didn't know, that was one of the things that my students said. So I learned a lot from my students too, just from this very short stories.
Well, great. I'm gonna stop the recording now.